The depression continued throughout that time, and when all of this was over, I developed much more severe symptoms, and I now have something called borderline personality disorder.
I remember when I lost my mind. There was something so pleasant about that place. Even your emotions have an echo in so much space. And when you're out there,
I use the word crazy because I think that's the best word that reflects my life that I like. Because my life looks pretty crazy most of the time.
There's 100,000 people in Hamilton alone that have mental illnesses. 1 in every 5 people do have some sort of mental illness, in their lifetime, that it'll affect every aspect of their life.
We are all part of the statistic of 1 in 5 Canadians. I like to say 1 in 4. I think that's truer to the reality of it. I'm a part of that statistic because I went through depression myself.
Depression is having no reason at all and still feeling awful and constantly feeling awful.
I had labeled myself that I was crazy. So I was diagnosed paranoid schizophrenic, I was diagnosed psychotic, and I was none of those things. I was a trauma survivor.
I don't consider myself an artist, really. I primarily consider myself a crazy person.
It was tough when I wasn't able to kind of articulate what was happening to myself. All I could say was I'm so alone and I don't understand because I'm in a room full of people and yet I'm so alone.
Hi, my name is Gail Mercer McKay and I've been in recovery for 10 years now.
Or it didn't seem relevant. It was sort of, I need help with question 6. It was never I can't sleep, I don't know what's going on, I'm worried. That was never the kind of thing that we told each other about.
It's good to remember, because more than anything else, the disease of addiction or alcoholism is that it has this amazing capacity to make you forget.
The basics, just start with your name.
Mad Studies talks about sort of connecting those diagnoses with actual identity, actual people who identify as depressed or bipolar or any of the other mental illnesses that come to mind. It sort of says you know what, it's okay to have those feelings, and you're not ill, you're not lesser because of it. You're just a different kind of human being, which is totally okay.
I think there are people in our world who experience time differently than we might suggest time operates. So people that can be very, very intimately connected to their past are able to enter states of consciousness where they're more fully connected to the past or more fully connected to the future, or don't exist in this present day reality the same way that most sane folks do. So I think there's some art involved in figuring out a new way to live in the world and a new way to navigate the world from a different perspective.
I think when I was really small, when I was a kid, I used to make up songs and sing them while I was doing things. So when I would be cleaning something, I would make up a song about how I was cleaning and just sing it while I was doing that. And then eventually I started writing poetry because I realized that I don't know, my siblings would make fun of me for making songs and singing them loudly. It's about, I've started using the word depression and depressed and anxious and anxiety in my poetry. Yeah, it's sort of connected to how I do things. And if I'm struggling with something, I end up writing about it. One of the ways I dealt with it was through writing a blog. That was a big stepping stone for me.
Remember back to grade 5. I remember I loved book reports. Everybody else hated them. And I loved reading and doing my book reports. And it was something, I had a teacher, his name was Mr. Fliss. And I will never ever in my life forget him because he thought I was smart. And he respected me and he talked to me in a way that I wasn't spoken to at home. But I think Mr. Fliss had something to do with me one day starting to write.
Writing for me was sort of my first therapist. It was sort of the only way I could get thoughts out. So what happens to me is everything kind of spins in my head and it just stays like in this vicious loop. Kind of like, I don't know, if you get like a marble in a bowl or something, just like this. That's what it feels like.
So for 3 solid months I got up and I made my cup of tea and I went and I wrote. And a lot of the pain came out that way. I always thought art wasn't for me. That art were things that very special, important people did. So here I am, almost 70, and learning that I'm an artist.
I do write about mental health issues quite a bit, especially when that intersects with the justice system. A lot of the people I write about who are in trouble with the law, who I see in courtrooms, have struggled with mental health issues and addiction issues. I'd known about Womankind Addiction Services for a long time, but I found out about the writing group from a Hamilton police officer, and she was telling me about the writing program and said that maybe I could lend some expertise. So I went to a regular evening meeting of the writing group at Womankind.
I believe that true identity is found in creative activity springing from within. It is found, paradoxically, when one loses oneself. Woman can best re-find herself by losing herself in some kind of creative activity of her own. Well, it started because as I started to get sober, I was journaling a lot and writing a lot, and I found it was really helpful for me. And I realized that that's what was happening. As I wrote and as I got lost in my writing, I was learning about myself. I was finding things out about myself. And it was almost as if this quiet voice inside of me was speaking the truth to me. I was quiet long enough to allow my real self to speak to me and give me some good guidance on what I needed to do. So I thought, you know what, if it's working for me, maybe it'll work for other women. So we gathered together here at Womankind, and Debbie Bang, who's the director at Womankind here in Hamilton, St. Joseph's Hospital, very, very supportive, amazing woman. She gave us the freedom and the room to get together. We started out with a small group of 5 women, and we tried it for 5 weeks. The end of the 5 weeks, there was just me and 1 woman left, but she was so enthusiastic. She'd been battling addiction for 20 years. And felt that she was finally starting to feel good about herself again, and felt that the writing was empowering her and giving her a voice.
When a woman who is in the detox center comes down and is encouraged to come down on a Tuesday night, picture her, 48, 72 hours sober. She's detoxing and probably jonesing, right? So she comes down on a Tuesday night and she is given a spiral notebook and a pen. They all start with, as you know, the starter sentence, and she starts to write. She writes and writes and writes consistently, constantly for 10 full minutes, does not lift her pen from the page, does not allow that internal editor to allow her to say, this is no good, you don't know how to spell. And none of that matters. She just writes. And then we stop, and then also, as you know, the second part of the writing program is the workshopping, where we read our pieces and we share it, and we distance ourselves somewhat after the author, after she has read her piece. We discuss what we thought of it and how it made us feel and how we identify and with the thoughts and feelings that it elicited to us. It is not the parole officer talking to her. It's not the judge talking to her. It's not a parent talking to her. It's not the doctor talking to her. It is other women. And there is that powerful, powerful sense of identification and belonging that I think truly makes this program unique. And why?
And I went without my notebook. I went as just a member of the community rather than Susan, the journalist, and spent the evening participating in their writing program, just the same as everybody else around the table. Introduced myself, did the writing exercises, shared my writing with the group, and I realized there was something very special going on there. The camaraderie between the women at the table, their ability to open up and share difficult and sometimes intimate details of their lives, the support that they gave each other. Many of these women have not finished high school, have difficulty reading and writing, and yet there they are writing their own story. For me as a writer, I don't know what I think until I write it down. It's part of my thought process. I work through things, through problems, through ideas, by actually writing them out. And I realized that that's not just me, that's the case for a lot of people, and it was certainly the case for a lot of those women, that there was a very cathartic process for them, taking the stories of their lives and of their struggles and putting it into words. It empowered them. It gave them control over their own story.
I think these women are raw. We're all raw when we come in here, and we're ready for something. We're ready for something to happen in our lives. And so because of that, there are no barriers. Women go for the jugular, and they write what's really going on. Part of why we wanted to go the route of publishing is because it's even further validation. You know, when you actually get a piece of your work in print, your name there, huge validation, I think.
And reading for me is trying to sort of parse through other people's feelings, other people's experiences, or because I think there's experience in all writing, even if it's about an astronaut in space, when you've never been in space, it can still be a lot about certain deeper issues that go on. But initially, the reason why I made that private blog was because I still wanted to connect through what I was writing. And the archive of things that I felt that I was writing, that I was just saving on my computer, that stuff I felt like needed to have a readership. It needed to be available to some people. I just didn't feel comfortable having those people be people I knew.
It's one of the ways that I can express what happened to me, and no one can tell me that that's not okay, or that the words are too nasty, or it's too graphic, or aren't you over that yet, or are you still talking about that? That's a lot of what survivors, male and female, meet. I've never let people see much of my writing. And even in my own self, I have these barriers to being honest and putting that on a page. And what's the right way to say it? Oh my God, if someone's seen that, what would they think? Because I always want to make it sound nicer. I want to protect people from what happened, and I don't want them to look at me in a different way because that happened to me.
I don't like using medical language. Like, I don't like using words that have been used against me, and words that have pathologized me, and words that... It has been really important to find some other way of talking about my experience, like some other language, some other story, so that I don't have to believe the stories like doctors tell about me, or the stories that the media tells about me, or the stories that my family tells about me. I get to make up some new stories. I don't know, I make buttons, and for me it's also partly because I wanted representations of myself in the world. Like, I wanted stuff about me I could put on the fridge, and I wanted stuff about me I could put on my backpack that fit me, not the mainstream stuff that upsets me and silences me and angers me and doesn't represent what my life looks like.
I would just keep asking why, and bring things on a smaller scale and ask, well, what happens here? Well, what happens here? What happens at the point of impact, at the molecule of impact? What's going on? She had me sort of draw a representation of what I was thinking or how I was thinking particular, and I drew, honest to God, a graph. Because it made sense to me. It was a 3D graph, and I used thin felt tip pens and colored pencils. And I was like, this is exactly what I'm experiencing right now.
Yeah, I think it's a great place for youth to come together and express themselves, and there's resources available so you can try things that maybe you've never done before. And just the community and the expression coming together is just really lovely.
It's so welcoming too, and like accepting of like your expressions and stuff.
I think youth have a lot of pressures on them, and they have a lot of constraints, and there's a lot of people telling us what we need to do. And I think the beautiful thing about art, no matter what medium it's in, like whether it's music or visual art or dance, whatever it is it kind of allows you to escape that. Like, you can just be free and open.
The cottage, the artist's cottage. Do you know of that
Cottage
place?
studio?
Yeah.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
I just like to come in and say hello and sit and look at what they're creating. It doesn't matter what they create, but I am always buoyed by the fact that they are so heavily emotionally invested in the process of creating. It is indeed the way out.
It's one of the first programs in, I think, all Ontario that actually supplies art supplies to the clients and gives them an opportunity to create when otherwise they may not have that opportunity. And it also is a great social network where people can come out and meet other people and be part of the society. The cottage studio is how I tend to socialize with the world.
It's just very, very close to their heart, so they're very. It's very important to them.
The hardest part?
Probably when you have to say absolutely not. You cannot do that. They don't necessarily consider that we're really in charge all the time because we're just like them, right? We have issues like they do.
There's a lot of people in here that are willing to give help to other people. So, like, it sort of brings us closer. The art brings us closer together. It gives us a common value for belonging, acceptance.
You know, that's my mother and father. That's the moment that my mother and father made me. Because I don't think we actually think about that moment when we came into being, but that is weird. That is my mother, and that's what's happening in their bodies. My father was always violent, so I couldn't ever imagine him like making love. I think it would have been very quick and nasty, to be honest. And my mother wouldn't have known anything about making love. You wouldn't have used those words. I think I'm a good thing, but it was telling me who I was going to be too. It was defining because it was in violence and in mental illness and in poverty and all the things that marginalized people suffer with. My father was an alcoholic, and all that was being given to me. And I was going to struggle with it. And I struggled with it for a long time, and it started there. Everything that those two things coming together means, if you're 50% of each parent, I believe abuse is wired into our DNA, that it changes how things might have been chemically. And looking at that and going, that's the beginning of me. Oh, I have the funniest feeling in my chest about it, like it's an emotional response that I can't name right now, and maybe never will be able to. But the idea of it when I did it was that my conception was a very harsh event.
I thought, this is the coolest thing ever. It's so honest and it's so authentic. So I ended up choosing to do a verbatim theater piece about mental health, mental illness among undergraduate students, to kind of follow along the whole Stomp Out Stigma movement and getting people talking, getting people listening. I was always surprised to what extent mental health had an effect on their lives and everything like that, because you can know a person, but until you ask the right questions, you're not going to get those answers. That's what's really important to me, is that I'm doing their stories justice, that they feel like it's a meaningful piece. That's what's important. Reading it over myself, and how did I feel at the end of that? Is that how I want my audience to feel? And then I finally finished off with something that I felt pretty proud of.
I think essentially, at its core, the value of what that woman is going through is not of value until it is shared. And as human beings, not just addicts or alcoholics, even more than a need to be loved is a need to belong. And the whole life of an addict is one of isolation. She feels toxic and alone and different, and it is my experience that she also feels fraudulent. We lie, we cheat, we steal, we do anything to feed that addiction. She does not get close to anyone for fear she infect them, infect her family, her children, her employer, her neighbors, everyone. You know, we have, and it goes beyond something called low self-esteem, you know. The addict's life is centered around feeding the addiction. No matter what, she gets her fix. And it's only when she achieves that elusive bottom, whatever that is. However, recovery is only possible when that feeling of being at one's bottom is immediately followed by some sort of action, some sort of conscious action on their part to get out.
For something like verbatim theater, to try to find ways to show in the text when they switch their train of thought, when they take a pause. So it's important to include things like long pause or short pause, or I ended up developing like techniques like a dash meant that they stuttered, and an ellipses meant that they were lost in thought, that kind of thing. And then trying to mimic them, mimic their speech patterns, mimic their moments when they internalize things more, mimic their moments when they laughed, even though it seems incredibly inappropriate to laugh at that moment. It's their story, so who are you to say that it's not okay to laugh?
Something that I found in myself, and I found even in talking to other actors, is a lot of people who latch on to acting as a career and as a thing that they do a lot suffer from some kind of mental illness, and they don't like being themselves. And that's a thing about myself too. Like a lot of the time, it's just so much easier to lose myself in another character than it is to be Jill that day. And it got me through so much. Right after the incident of sexual assault last year, I was performing in Spring Awakening. And it was incredibly tough, but almost therapeutic as well, because the character that I was playing suffered sexual abuse. And it was almost easier to deal with those feelings as Ilsa than it was to deal with those feelings as Jill.
There was a, I don't know if you know about the big, Clara's Big Ride that just happened, and they had 2 people with mental health issues, and they had the cameras on these people, and they were drawing and painting, and they're semi-professional and professional. And I mean, if a person with a mental illness can produce a very excellent and critically acclaimed canvas like Conrad Fury did before he passed away, then why, like, what's the problem? What's the difference?
Riding the roads, and when we rode in today, we started this 110-day journey, this 12,000-kilometer ride that is going to end in Ottawa on Canada Day, to the place that it brought me, and that was a place of struggle, of despair, of feeling completely worthless and hopeless, and feeling like I couldn't do anything, feeling like I wasn't even connected to my body anymore. And that was after having success in the Olympics. It is all about keeping this conversation going. I'm going to be able to talk about tonight.
The issue of mental illness, when I first started as a journalist, wasn't talked about a whole lot. More and more, though, there is discussion going on in our community about mental illness and how it fits into the rest of our society and how it fits into the criminal justice system in particular. It's a complicated issue.
I don't understand how we can have this millions of dollars facility up on the mountain and that we have people sitting on the corners at James and King with a cup and clearly with some kind of mental health issue. But I think what I'm trying to say is a lot of people went there that I'm sure it's helpful for them. But I don't know, it reminded me of some of my own stays when they firmly believed that making belts and ashtrays made you better in occupational therapy. And you would have to go. I did as I was told. I reached my hand across his desk and he pulled it up close to him. And he said, if you really wanted to die, you get a razor blade and you cut down this vein. And then you'll be dead. And all I could think was, oh my God, I'm too stupid to even kill myself.
When people think this is a facility with people who have mental illness, you think the worst, like that there's going to be violence. People are afraid of people that they don't understand. We never got it taught in the schools.
No.
What is mental illness and what happens. And when I started experiencing mental illness, I didn't know what was going on.
I don't think most people think much past mental health as a word, and that if you go see someone, then you're going to be okay, because they don't understand what's going on.
The language that she used, I think, is very similar to how a lot of people would have phrased it, but it was also really disheartening to hear. Things like, you need to go to help, you need to talk to someone, you need to figure out, you need to diagnose yourself and get this named. And that was the thing that really, really scared me, and I didn't want to do that. And I didn't end up doing that. I didn't end up going to see anyone professionally. I didn't end up getting put on medication. I didn't end up getting a diagnosis from a doctor. it was all something that I eventually dealt with myself, but it took a while. It wasn't like it was like a split second right after she said that everything was hunky-dory now. I could go outside and feel great about the world, but like for me, having that medical diagnosis wasn't as beneficial. It almost made it seem worse and bigger and unimaginable to me.
Okay, there's this constant like battle that I have in my head where I know that there are all of these services. I know that there are all of these support systems. And I know that there's people out there who want to help me. And yet, if I'm in my worst times, I will do anything to avoid actually getting help.
I think a lot of our mental health, that they look for a diagnosis for you. And when they find the diagnosis, then the next step is to find the right medication. And once the medication is found, then it's all good. And as someone who I kind of look at that I survived the psychiatric system from the time I was about 25 until I was about 38. I was in and out a lot. I had attempted suicide 4 times, serious attempts. And I'd go in and I'd tell them, I remembered the violence that had been perpetrated against me, and I would tell them about it, but it would never get talked about. And I didn't know if that was wrong or right.
I even still find myself like I'll apologize for getting into certain topics. I'm like, oh, sorry, I just like when I started talking to you about like my sexual abuse, like I apologize for it. That's not okay. Like it's a topic, and I can keep talking about it, and people need to listen.
There is a particular mindset in the science world, the professional science world, that's called publish or perish. Fed this idea to me that if you produce results, you will be of value. And conversely, if you do not produce results, you will not be of value. Like I've had profs where I've gone to them and sort of explained, like, I'm in a very bad place right now. I'm actually not going to be on campus for a week. I'm going to take care of myself. Like, I won't be here. And it's just sort of like, okay, well, you're going to miss this, this, and this. Go get the MSF. Go get the doctor's note. Da-da-da. Go. It was like, okay, did you hear me? I said I'm not doing well. I need you to have an understanding moment here. Like, and it's just like, okay, yes, but these are the resources available. I'm like, I know they're available, but you're my mentor.
Where I used to look up all of the fringe plays that dealt with like mental health madness themes, and there are like shitloads. And so I would go to like all these plays, and they were so horrible because people would use like caricatures of what it's like to be crazy and use it and like romanticize it, or only talk about like what it's like to be on a psych ward.
I think that like reframing that for a lot of people is helpful. Because calling something an illness means that it's wrong and you should be trying to get healthy. And I guess like that's within the whole spectrum of getting help, right? If you get help, you should fix yourself. And so using the words like recovery for me is, I used them a bunch before, but once again, it's not necessarily about recovering from this awful time in your life. It's about growing through those experiences.
It's a journey. It's a healing process. You're not just like, oh, I'm depressed, now I'm better. You have to it's a constant battle. Like
last week was Mental Illness Awareness on campus, and they came out with this hashtag, Today I Feel. And so they encouraged students who were feeling anything to post about what they were feeling. If you haven't been through it, like I was describing before with the depression's not just today I'm feeling sad. It's something bigger than that. And to boil it down to today I feel something is really, we can make it better by actually legitimately talking about mental illness. It takes a lot out of you to relive all those experiences, and to force people who've gone through that to constantly be legitimizing their feelings through discussing it over and over again. That's part of the stigma too.
I remember when I lost my mind. There was something so pleasant about that place. Even your emotions have an echo.
Is something that's come up, which is good, because there are some really dark moments in the play, and that's the truth. There's some really dark moments in these people's lives, but in the end,
yes, I have days where I just want to curl up in bed and never speak to anyone again, but I'm so hopeful for my future, and I know I have so many things to give to the world, and so that keeps me going.
One of the things I used to think was that I had spent my life dancing as fast as I could to try to please people. That ballerina in those shoes, I wanted that to signify my journey of how hard I've worked at being well and being competent and having a meaningful life. And I personally believe a society is only as good as how it takes care of its most vulnerable people, and we're not doing well.
People have problems and they don't know how to solve them, or they've made choices that aren't the wisest, but we all make choices that aren't the wisest. It's just a misunderstanding in society's viewpoint.
I need people to understand that there's a world outside the one that they've been schooled at. There's more information out there than what you've sort of grown up with.
We have something to offer society rather than being a burden on it.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. Yeah.
Someone said, perhaps at its root, all mental illness is a form of disconnection, leaves one lost and alone. And recovery, when it is one alcoholic talking to another alcoholic, or addicts coming together to write creatively and share their experience, it is a powerful connection.
It's like sort of a connection that you have with someone. When you're reading, you're connecting yourself to the writer. When you're writing, you're connecting yourself to the reader. And it's sort of like, it's letting you know that you're not alone in the world.